Ow! You know, it's not as much about the microphone as you might think. Hey guys, I am Nova, and this is one of the most requested videos I've had for years, and it asks the question, what microphone should I buy if I'm going to get into content creation, whether that's live streaming or doing stuff here on YouTube or anything really that would require, well, a microphone. And that's not a super hard thing to answer, but it can get complicated, and I'm sure some of you before landing here were on Google and got caught in a crazy rabbit hole with a bajillion opinions and lots of detailed information with lots of stuff that you might not have even understood. I'm going to do my best to try and make it understandable, and if you need really in-depth information or more than this, then feel free to investigate further any of the topics that I'm going to talk about broadly here on this video, and get a little bit more learned. You don't really need to get all that deep into it though, and what I tell you today is likely going to be more than enough to get the job done, or at least get you 80 or 90% of the way there. And for most people, that's plenty. So, come along for this little audio journey with me, shall ya? The first thing that I want you to try and get into your mind is that it's not actually so much about the microphone that you're using as it is everything around the microphone. I know that sounds crazy, but follow me on this, okay? If you look around, and speaking of crazy, it might seem like I am in an asylum. There's lots of padded wall everywhere you look, and that's for good reason, and I'm sure that you already understand to some degree why that stuff would be there, but if you don't, well, it's to stop my voice from bouncing all over the walls and the windows and everything else in the room and finding its way back into the microphone. And that is a big part of what will make your audio sound a million times better. You can take a well-treated room and plant a relatively inexpensive microphone in it, and all else being equal, it's going to sound way better than you probably think it would for the money that you would spend. So, I often tell people that before you go hunting down super expensive microphones, perhaps that you've seen some of your favorite content creators use, take some time and understand how to treat your room. And it's not super expensive itself, so let me try to describe to you what options you've got for that. As you can see behind me and above one Mr. Jeff Goldblum wearing a Santa hat because he celebrates all 365 days of Christmas appropriately, there are all of these white boxes. And yes, it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but they do the job. And what are they? Well, it's rock wool insulation with some fabric over top of it that's breathable. And by that I mean, if, believe it or not, you breathe on it, you'll feel it on the other side. And if you've got air passing through it from your breath, odds are sound's going to go through it too. And you needed to do a little bit of that so that the insulation can do its job in this application. You can, of course, go out and spend a little bit more money, and by a little bit, I mean considerably more money, if you don't want to take the time to build something like this, and have it look, well, honestly, a hell of a lot better. And it will also sound really good. And there are several options for those that, again, you've probably already seen some of, but the most recent one that I suspect everyone would have at least seen in their socials if they follow content creators is the Elgato, are they just called wave panels? I think they put wave in the front of everything these days, so just, ride it. It will do a great job, or they will do a great job. I'm certain of it. Elgato makes pretty good products. So if you want something that looks a little bit better, that's another option as well. But anything that is dense enough, but not a reflective surface, like a hard table or wall or glass, is going to do a good job of absorbing those frequencies from your voice. So where do you put them? Well, I mean, you could get an idea just looking around this room, although it might look like they're a bit helter-skelter. Honestly, there is a science to where you're going to put panels, especially if you're trying to use the least number of panels possible in order to treat your space. Generally speaking, though, there are some guidelines that you could kind of follow if you didn't want to go really deep into it and just kind of throw some stuff up and get most of the way there. And this is what you can do. Put some to your left. Put some to your right. And by that I mean immediately left and right of the direction in which you are speaking. Put something, if you can, behind your monitors and above a little bit, unless you're, behind a satellite of 58 monitors like some people are these days. You can put, of course, more importantly than most places, right behind you. And that's because you're going to talk, it's going to hit those monitors, it's going to hit that wall that's likely only a couple feet from you, hit the back wall, and then right into the microphone from behind. So you want to cover that. So something on the back wall, and then something right above where you're speaking is also not a bad idea. And if you're not in a carpeted room, I'll just put like a rug or something underneath your feet if you're on laminate or hardwood or something of that nature. And that should really get you a lot of the way there. You'll notice just doing that how much less reflections the room has. If you want to go further than that, you can stuff some stuff in the corners to help absorb some of the bass. That's where the bass likes to hide, in the corner of the room, like you're in 8th grade trying not to dance with the girl that you've been looking at for a long time, and that totally didn't happen in my life. Beyond that, it can just be, you can get real messy with it. People put stuff everywhere, but at the end of the day, left and right, front and back, up and down, right from your speaking position is likely going to be just fine. So your room is treated, and whether or not it looks good, it's done, and now you're ready for more. So what comes next? Well, honestly, again, it's whatever's around your microphone. And what tends to be right around your microphone? Well, it's your face, it's your pie hole, your mouth talking, spitting all over your microphone, giving it no respect. And so you gotta learn some microphone etiquette. What do I mean by that? Well, don't eat your microphone. I know that you've seen maybe some people doing that, and while it might make the sounds they want, it's not really all that recommended. What you want to do is you want to kind of take your hand, and my hands are a little bigger than yours probably, but more or less, if you were to take your thumb and your pinky, give or take, and then did this like you were, getting hammered, and then measured roughly the tip of the microphone to your mouth, is a good starting point for most people. If you can get that distance from the mic, that tends to be more or less the sweet spot. And that also goes a long way in providing nicer sounding audio. The only exceptions to this are if you wanted to use what's called the proximity effect, which some people do. If you get closer to the microphone, it will get bassier and bassier and bassier and bassier. But you don't always want it to be that. Sometimes you just want it to sound more like you, and that distance tends to help with that. Something else that you've probably seen people use are pop filters, and I should totally have one on hand to swing it around. Maybe. I have them. They're just, okay, you know what? It's one of these things. You've probably seen these, well, just about everywhere that there's a microphone, with few exceptions. And what does this thing do? Well, even though you have provided the appropriate space from your microphone, you can still provide unwanted wind from your mouth, which I guess could be used for describing a lot of things that people talk about these days. But regardless, it's stopping plosives, is what that's called. P sounds. And I'm sure lots of you have at least learned about that as well. But that's really all this is stopping. So you get this out in front of the microphone. Mine's way above here because I'm using a different type of microphone than you'd probably be used to seeing. And it stops your plosives. That's really all it is. So unless you like people having their ears blown out every time that you talk about your enormous pee-pee, grab one of these. It doesn't have to be super expensive, and I'm holding a relatively expensive one right now because I used to use a much more sensitive microphone, but really, and I mean really, you could use almost anything. Some people have used a coat hanger and some pantyhose, and honestly, it works. But you can also just buy one for like $15 and not have pantyhose in front of your face all the time, unless that's what you want. I don't even know what to do with this anymore. So anyway, we've treated the room. We've taught you how to respect and socially distance with your microphone. We've even told you that despite that distance, it might be good to still put something between your mouth and the mic, and that's a pop filter. Going further than that, now we can actually talk a bit about microphones, and there are different types of microphones that work in different types of environments, and depending on your environment, you might want to choose one of these various types of microphones. So let's talk about microphone types. There are, generally speaking, two types of microphones. There's the dynamic mic and the condenser mic. One of these two microphones can hear a butterfly flapping its wings from low Earth orbit. The other, sadly, cannot. And depending on what you want to do within the space that you've now treated, well, you're going to choose one of those two types of microphone. And within those types, you have some options. So let's talk about those. I mentioned the whole butterfly thing because, well, condenser microphones are really, really sensitive, or at least they're a lot more sensitive than their dynamic counterparts. That's both a good and a bad thing. Good in that, well, they'll make you sound more bright and airy without having to do a whole bunch of post-production, usually, whereas dynamics might need a little bit more work. However, those characteristics also lend condenser microphones to picking up unwanted sounds like keyboard strokes or mouse clicks or just general room noise easier than dynamics. If you think you can control all of those things and you really like the sound that condenser microphones provide, then there's absolutely no problem in picking them up. Just be aware of those things going in. As for which condenser microphones I would suggest picking up, well, I've got a couple of options, but for beginners, I'm going to try and steer you guys in a really particular direction. And that really particular direction is the Elgato Wave 1 or Wave 3 microphones. They both are going to sound great, they both are plug-and-play USB, and they both come with software that will inevitably allow you to make your audio sound even better, especially in a live environment. And while post-production audio treatment is something that I might do in another video, just know that those two microphones come with that option. As for XLR microphones, I have a couple of options, but just keep in mind that if you do want to go this route, and I'm sure most of you know this already, XLR microphones do need an audio interface of some kind to be between it and the computer to both power the microphone and send the audio through. It's not as simple as a USB mic where you just plug it into a USB port and away you go. Now, with that out of the way and knowing that that's going to add some cost to this kind of a setup, I've got a lower end and a little bit of a mid-range in the condenser category for you to consider, and then you can go Google to your heart's content if you want to look into some other options. The first one is the Audio-Technica AT2020. It's a microphone that's been around for a very long time, and a lot of people used them back in the day in its USB format until Elgato just recently came out and, of course, made them kind of irrelevant for that format, but the XLR version is still totally usable and affordable when you're just starting out. If you want to go a little bit above that, there's the Rode NTA1, a microphone as well that's been around for a long time, and is considered one of the better microphones to have ever been made, if you want to listen to that kind of talk anyway. It is going to sound really good, and I do recommend it, and it is also not exorbitantly expensive, which you can totally do if you want to look on Google like I just said. When it comes to dynamic microphones, you don't have quite the breadth of options that you do with condensers, and that's especially true if you're hoping to have something that's USB plug and play. They don't really exist, so if you want that, you're going to have to stick with the condenser side of the spectrum. If you do want to commit to that dynamic microphone, also keep in mind that not every audio interface is capable of powering them by itself. Sometimes you might need something like a cloud lifter, which is kind of an inline power boost that gives clean or cleaner gain that then can be passed on to the interface, and then the interface doesn't have to do nearly as much work. And that adds a little bit of extra cost. So keep in mind as well, the dynamics, while they can also sometimes be less expensive than some of the higher end condensers, can still cost a pretty penny. Now that hasn't stopped your favorite content creators on Twitch and YouTube from using one of the two microphones on my list. It's the Shure SM7B. It is a fantastic microphone. It does a great job of keeping out the room noise and the keyboard clackety-clacks and the mouse clickety-clicks and all the stuff that you want a dynamic microphone to do, but it is relatively expensive, and again, you need to have a lot of power to pull it off. Some of the interfaces that have just come out, like the most recent one from Elgato, which I promise you I'm not sponsored by, it's just they came up with a lot of products here in the last couple of weeks, can get away with it for sure, but just be mindful that it might not be enough for your tastes. Another option that I would recommend, and the one that I personally used for many years, and we also use for the podcast when we're in the same room, which thanks to the Rona has been a while, is the Electro Voice RE20. It's my personal favorite dynamic microphone because it's specifically designed to do what you're trying to accomplish with a dynamic, and that's keep as much extra noise out as possible. This microphone's been around for a very long time, and it is in basically every radio station on the planet at this point, and has been for longer than any of us have been alive. And so, if you trust that kind of a history, that's another option to take into consideration. The last piece to this whole audio puzzle that we're going to talk about in this video anyway is post-production. And while that's not necessarily perhaps the right term to use for a live environment, we're going to call it post-production for the ease of this conversation. And specifically, I'm going to talk about being able to do equalization, compression, and noise gating. There can be lots more to audio processing than that, but to keep it simple, we're going to talk about those three things and the options that you have at your disposal to accomplish that. There are two types of ways in which you can go about processing your audio, and depending on your setup, you might even choose to use a little bit of both. That's software processing and hardware processing. Now, if you went with a USB microphone setup, then you're kind of stuck with just the software side, but if you go with XLR, you can do what I just talked about, which is either do it entirely with hardware or entirely with software, or a little bit of column A and column B. Your software options are numerous, and it could be as simple as using OBS and its internal capabilities to accomplish your audio processing goals, or you could get a little bit fancier and do some processing with Reaper or Adobe Audition, which may be considered more professional in that regard, the latter of which is what I'm currently using right now. If you're going to go with hardware-based processing, at least in part or in full, there are more options there to take into consideration. The two stages that I would say exist for hardware processing are simply relying on a mixer to take in all of your audio inputs, and then have the mixer that has onboard equalization and compression, and perhaps, if you're lucky, even gating, and using that. And then the other step is to go even further than that and have a mixer, but then also have a outboard equalizer and a compressor and a noise gate, which I used to use in the past, and let me tell you, as nice as it is, maybe don't do that. Ultimately, I hope you guys can take away from this video that you just don't need to spend a ton of money on your equipment in order to have great sounding audio for your content creation purposes, especially a microphone, because at the end of the day, treating your room, learning how to socially distance for your microphone the appropriate amount, and doing a little bit of that post-processing while also choosing the microphone that suits your situation the best is going to do more for your audio than simply running out and buying a ton of expensive equipment. And in fact, you will see lots of people that have a ton of expensive equipment and don't know about these other things or don't practice them, and it makes all of this expensive equipment sound terrible. Okay, so I know this video isn't exactly the most in-depth video ever made for this topic, and that was very intentional because there are lots of in-depth videos around. It's just that lots of people have asked me to do something like this, even at a high level, to help them get started. If you want me to be able to look at some of these topics more in depth, feel free to say so in the comment section below, or ask me some questions and I will do my best to answer them. And if I've got some time, I will perhaps even put together more in-depth videos on each of these topics. But again, make sure you let me know if there's something in particular that you would like me to try and cover, and I will see what can be done. Otherwise, that's going to be it for this one. Hit the like button if you enjoyed yourself, subscribe, hit the bell icon so you don't miss any videos in the future. Follow me on my socials if you want to. All of that stuff's in the description box below. Thank you once again, guys. I am Nova, and until I see you next time, have a good one.